Hey everyone, welcome to Practical Alchemy. Today is going to be a skill build tutorial in Fusion 360 where I'm going to show you how to make this PokeBall. Now the goal of the skill build tutorials is for us to model along together. And as we're doing so, I'm going to be talking you through my process, my techniques, my workflow. And the goal here is this will give you an opportunity to practice with the Fusion 360 tools, and it's going to give you a better understanding of how to interact with the workflow and hopefully pick up some new tools along the way. So encourage you to model along as we go and pause whenever you need to catch up. So the reason that I chose this particular object for our skill build tutorial, number one, it's a great little pop culture item. Number two, it's got some interesting and not overly complex geometric challenges. And three, I think that this would be a fun challenge because after looking at this, I thought, well, I bet we can model this in one single sketch, or at least have it driven by one single sketch. No offset geometries, no projected sketches. One single sketch can drive all of the functions that we need. And I know it can work because we did it. So let me show you how. First, we're going to select everything and delete it back out. Actually, no, we're not. So before we start to do any modeling, let's look at this object and let's think about what are the major aspects that we want to try to capture. Well, number one, it's a ball. It's a sphere. It's round. So that means that it's going to have some vertical symmetry, some horizontal symmetry across the front. Most importantly, it's going to have radial symmetry. There's going to be a central axis around which this entire object is revolved. And you can see that through the central channel running along the middle. The other big thing that I notice when I'm looking at this object, thinking about how I'm going to model it, is that there's a lot of concentric circles happening. So I've got vertical symmetry here, horizontal symmetry here, and then I've got a bunch of concentric circles radiating out from the center. So what that makes me think is that we're going to have revolve, that's going to be key, and then probably one face sketch. If I'm going to do it with one sketch, that sketch is probably going to be on this face. So with those two things in mind, radial symmetry and a central concentric circles, let's start modeling. So one sketch, that sketch is going to be based off of where those circles were in the front plane. So we're going to select the front plane and we're going to set up our sketch. So next thing, remember we said we had a vertical revolve axis that is going to be symmetric across the x-axis. So I'm going to grab the line tool, create a vertical line, and I'm going to add a center point. So start triangle comes up, that is the center point constraint, and then I'm going to drag that to the origin because that is the most logical point for both horizontal and vertical symmetry. Next, let's convert that to a center line and start to build our circles. Now that I've got this, I can create all of my circles to be concentric around this line. So create a circle. I'm going to do a center point circle. So click here to place the center point at that origin point. And point number two is going to be at the end point of my line. So now you can see as I drag this circle, it is always going to be symmetric across that x-axis. And let's go ahead and give this some dimension. We're just going to say it is 5 inches for now. Okay, now the next thing that I know about this is that it's kind of two circles, right? They have that outer circle and now it's got that inner circle. So let's go ahead and add a second circle here, which is essentially an offset. And I'm going to offset that by, let's set distance, let's say that is 0.2 to start with. All right. And now let's start creating our center circle. So we know we're going to have our button, and that button's going to have a rim around it, and then it's going to have kind of a little bit of a dust groove around the edges of that button. And then we also need to capture the central ring that goes around the edge of the object here, that central cutout ring. So that is going to be captured by a rectangle. Now we know it is going to be symmetric across the x-axis, so let's go ahead and use the center rectangle tool. So we can define the center point, click out, and drag somewhere on this circle. So no matter where or how thick I define this, it is always going to be symmetric. Okay, great. Now the next thing that I'm going to do is I need to add one more groove here that essentially captures how this cut goes around the circle. So I'm going to create one additional circle here. All right. And now, next thing that I need to do is I know that this groove is going to be consistent in terms of its thickness. So let's add an extra line here to capture that. So I'm going to add a horizontal line here. I'm going to convert that to construction geometry. And I know that that is going to be the same length as that. So I'm going to hold down Shift, select both, and hit the equal key. Okay, great. And now let's just find approximately how big that circle should actually be. So let's say that is going to be about, what are we going to say, 2.25. It's probably good. And then this offset distance is going to be, well, let's go ahead and pull these in a little bit. Let's say this dust groove is going to be about 0.05 inches thick, very thin. Let's say this ring is going to be about 0.3. That looks about good. So now all we really need to define is how thick this groove is going to be, and everything else is going to radiate out from there. So let's grab our sketch dimensions here. Click, click, drag that out, and let's just say that's going to be 0.25 for now. All right, great. So that is it. That is our sketch that is going to drive everything. So now we've got to be smart in terms of what we're going to create. So there's going to be a few geometric objects here. We've got the main ball, and then we also have the inner ball. So let's go ahead and I'll turn the layout grid on just for a second, just so we can see a little bit until we get some geometry in here. So, and don't forget to hit save. Save often. Okay, so let's go ahead and start off by creating that inner circle. So it's already when I hit the Revolve tool, it's already going to select my inner axis. And now I just need to select all of these shapes inside of here. My ball is not going to be hollow at this point. It's going to be a solid PokeBall. I only need to select things on one side. It's going to be a 360-degree revolve. Hit OK, and that is going to be the first body. Take a quick pause here, and let's go ahead and rename this as the master sketch, or our layout sketch, because it will be the only sketch. And then let's go ahead and rename this as the center ball. And just to give ourselves a little bit of appearance, I'd already selected some things, but essentially just go ahead and click and drag a black material there to define the center ball. Okay, now we can go ahead and hide this, and then the next thing that we need to do is create the outer ball. So let's go ahead and turn that sketch visibility back on, and we're going to create a new revolve, which is only going to capture the outer ball. Now, when you go through and you select all of the profiles that are going to be associated with this, make sure that you select this tiny little shape that's captured here. You don't want to forget that, because that is going to change up the geometry a little bit. All right, and now we are going to hit OK. And this is going to be the outer ball. Doesn't look like much right now. Kind of looks like it's the exact same thing. Let's turn off our sketch for a second though. And I'm going to change the appearance to some type of acrylic transparent plastic, which you can find down here in the plastic drop-down menu. But I picked the acrylic red plastic. And now you can see here I've got my outer ball, but then I've got my inner ball inside of it. Okay, so now that I've got the two main balls, next thing to do is to figure out how to get that cut going around the center. Now, you may be saying, well, when we created this, close the material panel here, when we created this feature, why didn't we just leave out this central cut? And then we could have just avoided the whole situation, right? We could have just left it out, and that would have made our lives easier. The problem is I didn't do that because I still want the front of this sphere in order to create the button. So rather than leave it out from the beginning, I'm now going to cut it out from the rest of our shape. So in order to do that, I'm going to turn this off again, and I'm going to go ahead and create an extrusion. So I'm going to create an extrusion straight out to capture this inner circle. All right, and I'm just going to drag this out. All right, and hit OK. Create a new body here. All right, and now what I can do is I'm going to turn this. I'm going to call this my cut body. And now I'm going to go ahead and change this. I'm going to click on Edit Command. And rather than create a new body, I'm going to turn this to a cut and hit OK. And so now you can see I've actually got the main ball, which is going to be the outer shell. And I've also got this secondary body that I can use as my button. Great. Very good. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create turn off my center ball, turn off the button. Now I'm going to create one more revolved cut that's going to allow me to split this ball into two pieces. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to hide the outer ball for now, create a third revolved feature, and it is only going to capture, remember we got to catch this little piece. I should have just turned to construction geometry so this wouldn't happen, but I didn't, and hit OK. Now, you see we've got this ring going around the center that is going to split our ball in half. To do that, all I have to do is go back into the Revolve command, edit feature, and turn the operation type from new body to cut, hit OK, and you can see that our outer ball has now become two outer balls. So the lower outer ball can be renamed to the outer base. And as long as we're here, let's go ahead and change the appearance type to a white plastic. Well, for now, let's go ahead and go with the polycarbonate clear, just so it makes it easier to see everything that's happening inside of our object. I think this is a good place to go ahead and hit save again. Remember to save often, very important. And going to turn the center ball back on. It's a bit strange. And a button. You know what? I think my cut operation also went through the outer ball. No worries. Go ahead and edit this feature. The objects to cut are, yep. Get rid of that center ball. Hit OK. Gotta love the timeline. And turning my master sketch off. Okay. Now, next thing we need to do is create the cut in for this button. And this is actually just a little bit tricky to create. I'm going to turn the outer base off, and I'm going to turn the center ball off because I don't need them. This is a little bit hard to create with one sketch just because it's a little bit more complex than you may be doing by default. So let's turn this on. It's a simple extrude, but there's some new options that I actually don't use very often. So this is exciting. We're going to go ahead and hit extrude. And we are going to select everything associated with this button groove. And let's go ahead and just pull it out. Easiest way, I think, to start off to set up some of these extrudes, especially things that are a little bit more complicated, is to start them off as a new body. And that way you can really see everything that's happening. Okay. And what we're going to do in order to create a cut in without breaking this into two objects is we don't want it to start from the profile plane. I actually want it to be starting offset from this back surface. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my start as the object, and I'm going to select this back plane. So now you can see it started here. And then I can set the offset to, let's say, 0.1. You see that brought it back the wrong way. So I'm going to turn that to negative 0.1. That's looking better. And now I think it's a little bit too deep. I'm going to say negative 0.05. And I'm going to hit OK. That's looking a little bit better. Doesn't really matter how big it is because I'm going to go back into this command, edit feature, and I'm going to turn that operation to cut. And the object to cut is the button, and hit OK. Very good. So this is pretty much, I think, we're getting close to done. So let's turn this sketch off. Let's turn all of our bodies back on. I'm going to turn this grid plane off because I think the layout grid is distracting at this point. Let's take our button, change the appearance to a metal. What should we do here? Do aluminum. I tend not to do chrome, especially when I'm doing some developmental modeling, just because it's so reflective that it's very difficult to tell what's going on, I feel like, a lot of times. So we'll just start with aluminum. And now, let's make one more change. Let's go to our base appearance, and let's now turn this to a solid white plastic. So it's a little bit easier to see. And that is looking pretty darn good. Let's go ahead and hit save here. Either save, and great. And next thing to do is just to add some details to make it look a little bit more realistic and a little more three-dimensionally designed. So let's add a slight chamfer around this edge, just to radius this back a little bit. And we'll set that at 0.05. That's cool. That's a little small though, isn't it? Oops. 0.075, that's better. And now, if I'm looking at this geometry, I think I'd like to chamfer this edge as well. Don't know that I want it to be the same chamfer, so I'm going to chamfer it independently. Let's start with 0.1, see how that looks. That looks pretty good because I do like where it's starting, but I don't really love the angle here. So let's go ahead and change that to a from an equal distance to a 2 distances. Change that to 0.125. Let's see what that does. Oops, wrong way. And so 0.075. So it's a little bit shallower of a chamfer. That's cool. Hit OK. Next thing I want to do is I want this button not to be so flush. I want it to sit forward a little bit more. So let's go ahead and go up to the press pull command. I'm going to take this surface, and we're just going to pull it out by 0.1. It's still a little aggressive. 0.075 to start with. That is looking pretty sweet. Let's go ahead and just add some small chamfers. I'm going to add one very small chamfer here. And I'm going to add another very small chamfer here. I had it as a fillet in the original, but I didn't really like the way that looks. All right, that's looking pretty good. Now, the nice thing about what we've done here is that we've got this PokeBall, and it's looking pretty darn sweet. But let's say it's not exactly what you wanted it to look like. There's a lot of different PokeBall models out there on the internet. There's a lot of different proportions that you can look at. Let's change this material really quick. Outer ball appearance. Change it to a plastic, right? Just so we can see it a little bit better. Now, you may say to yourself, well, I don't really love the way that this groove is. I think this groove is a little bit too thick, or I think the button's a little bit too big or too small. The awesome thing about driving this off of a single sketch is that we can play with all that. Let's say I did think that groove at 0.2 was a little bit too deep. We can change that back to 0.1. And let's say that's the only change that Yeah, I think that's good. Let's just say I didn't like the depth of that, or we could say this is, we'll change this to 0.3, scale everything up. See, everything's linked together and everything's scaling together, and so nothing's going to break when you change up proportions to make the button a little bit bigger or the depth a little bit smaller. So you've got a lot of really great options here. I actually think that this groove is a little bit thick still, so I'm going to edit this sketch one more time. I'm going to reduce this to 0.2. You can see how that kind of changed everything up. Yeah, I like that a lot better. And I think it's nice. I'm really digging this. All right, so that's it. This PokeBall is done. What's really exciting about this is that now that you have this basic PokeBall created, you can use these same elements, add to this master sketch, add another sketch, add some revolves and some cutouts to create literally any ball that you can possibly imagine. You could create a master ball, an ultra ball. If you've had a specific PokeBall design that you've been sketching in the back of your notebook for the last 15, 20 years, you now have the skills to make it a reality. And that is going to do it for today's skill build tutorial. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please hit the like button. If you had any questions or comments, drop them down in the comments section, including ideas for future videos. I'll add them to the queue. And most importantly, if you'd like to learn more about Fusion 360 and other skill build tutorial videos in the future, hit the subscribe button to stay subscribed to the channel. And with that, I will say thank you, and I will see you in the next one. And don't forget to hit save.